All right, Tom, welcome to the RR Summit. You have made it. You've made it to the summit. This year's theme is Rise and Thrive, and which is why I thought you would be the perfect person for our opening fireside chat. And before we get into your brain here, I want to just tee it up. I want to give you a little bit of your background so the audience knows a little bit about your journey over the last 8 years. You've gone from the Oracle of Austin to the Lord of the Rings, and we want
Oh,
to take the
easy.
audience. I warned you. You're we're trying to make that one stick. Anyways, we met at the Austin HomeAway headquarters in 2016. When I was an early founder of NoiseAware, you were the COO, and I walked in, and it was actually the day you were launching Stay Neighborly, as it
That's right.
were.
That's right.
Yep. And since then, you've helped HomeAway go public, and then ultimately through the acquisition with Expedia in 2015. Then you moved to the West Coast where you were the president of SurveyMonkey, now Momentive AI, helping them go public in 2018. And since 2022, you joined Aura Ring, where you went from happy customer, you put on the ring, you accepted the ring, to CEO, which is a really cool story, which I hope you'll tell us a little more about. But at Aura, I know you're helping folks understand their bodies, their health, their daily rhythms, especially sleep. So I know all these things are top of mind for our audience. And I do want to call out your last month because it's insane when I was doing a little prep. Aura hit their 2.5 million rings sold. You launched your fourth generation ring. You signed a major contract with the US Department of Defense, acquired a company called Sparta. Sounds like a cool company. Maybe you could tell us about that. And then ranked number one in the smart ring category for 2024, all in the last month. I felt no reason to go further because I was like, that's insane. Tom's changing the world, and he'll tell us a little bit about that. So, are you ready for this meeting? How's your readiness, Tom?
My readiness is extremely high, David. I got a score of 90 this morning, which I think is above the normal range for me. So I am ready and bring it on.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you for carving out a little time for us here. Let's jump into your life, not now, but I want to take you back to teenage Tom. I'm sure you don't get asked about teenage Tom too much, but I'm curious about teenage Tom and how would you describe yourself pre-career, pre-work life? What were you interested in, and how does that make sense? What you were interested in, how your career has unfolded? What are the correlations there?
Well, it's always interesting to go back that far in time. The reality is as a teenager, I was pretty much a nerd. So that tracks, and that hasn't changed a bit. I was always into technology and computers and math, and that was kind of my MO. But I was also an athlete, a pretty middling athlete, but I was a cyclist, and that's actually where I was introduced to kind of the world of performance. At the time, I lived in Reno, Nevada. A man named Greg LeMond was the first American winner of the Tour de France, and he lived there as well. And so I sort of was at the fringes of an athletic culture, which started me down the path, I think, that I ended up at Aura because I remember, logging my training sessions and tracking my resting heart rate and all the things that are sort of typical, I think, for really not even professional athletes today, more or less anybody who is interested in health and fitness does this automatically through wearables. So I was using a graph paper and a pencil to record all this data, and I didn't have a computer to process it. But that's really the kind of early days maybe of the Aura journey for me.
And that pen and paper to now, having this passive device on your finger, I'm sure it's one of those, if I only had that then, what I could have done or known, which is something I want to talk about because I'm sure a lot of people aren't wearing a wearable in the audience today. I've worn one for a long time, and I think that jump is a pretty big one. But let's fast forward a little bit to vacation rentals. That's what our audience is here. How did you find your way into the vacation rental industry? Have you ever been a vacation rental host or owner? What was that like? What attracted you to this industry that we love so much?
Well, like many people, my first experience with vacation rentals was as as a guest. And we had rented uh, a place up in Sonoma, California. We were living in San Francisco at the time, and we stayed in this lovely house. We just had a couple of kids. We had twin 3-year-olds and a 6-year-old, and we were looking for a thing to do for a vacation, and we really thought like this is the way to do it. Obviously, vacation rentals are more superior to hotels, more space, more comfort, outdoor space for the kids to run around in. And that was my first experience, both with Sonoma as a market and with vacation rentals as kind of a travel experience. And I was captivated. I immediately thought, oh my God, we need to both be, in this market somehow. We need to be thinking about it. And it wasn't until about 3 years later, I was changing jobs and looking for my next thing to do. And I came across the opportunity at HomeAway. And I immediately thought, if I'm going to understand how to really succeed at HomeAway, I need to be a vacation rental owner. Because at the time, the orientation of the company was very much serving owners. And so I jumped right in. We had bought a house in the intervening years in Sonoma, and I thought, what better thing to do than to start to be a vacation rental owner? And of course, interesting thing about Sonoma is it's a year-round market. You have many weekenders coming from San Francisco or other areas. You have people coming from across the globe for wine country tourism, and then you have kind of like a steady celebratory kind of group activity, multi-generational families celebrating milestone birthdays or something like that. You also have bachelorette trips, and you have wedding parties and all that stuff because wine country itself is a destination. I didn't know it at the time. I just knew that I loved Sonoma and that it was a great kind of experience for me to sort of understand both the product and the experience of being an owner. Now, what's interesting is I also moved out of the Bay Area to Texas, and because HomeAway was based in Austin, and so my I had to manage the property remotely, and I was committed to being kind of I think what they would call today a super host or something like that. I wasn't going to use a property manager. I wanted to do it myself, but being 1,500 miles away makes it a little challenging. So I really got into all the technology that I could use to manage my vacation rental. Figured out how to use the booking sites. Thought hard about how to do stuff remotely. Rigged up the house for remote management, and that was really foundational in my understanding of the VR industry, and frankly informed a lot of the decisions that we took at HomeAway.
Yeah, I just highlights, right? What sticks out to you? Do you remember your first guest? Do you remember that like ping on your phone? Like these are things that I remember as a host.
Well, I remember my first booking. I don't know if I remember my first guest, but it was kind of magical to kind of like engage with somebody, and frankly, that they would be willing to send me thousands of dollars 6 months in advance of staying in a property without knowing anything about me, or really only looking at pictures of the house and maybe not even being certain that it existed. It was kind of magical, and I think actually it sort of really informed my passion for HomeAway. I ultimately, I think on the back of my experience was, a pretty good candidate for the job, and got the job, and felt pretty good about being able to understand at a visceral level. A couple experiences really, stand out for me. One is we had vacation rental guests in the house during the fires of
Hmm.
2018, and they were from Italy. Did not speak English very well. They were elderly. It was a 72-year-old man and his three older sisters staying in the house. And they called in the middle of the night, and they explained that they were being evacuated by the police, and it was one of these things where you feel a tremendous amount of responsibility for them. And of course, I wasn't nearby, so I had to kind of activate whatever resources I could to support them and help them get a place to stay that was not endangered. Fortunately, I'm sure you're wondering how the story turned out. They were fine. The house was fine. No one was injured, and it was. But it's certainly that kind of sense of responsibility as an owner or a host or a property manager that you have for your guests. I mean, that's the essence of hospitality. I would say another one that really sticks in my mind is we started kind of putting some, kind of remote management kind of technology, digital locks. These are all standard things today, but at the time it was kind of novel. Sort of digital locks, cameras for observing the entrance, remote control of the thermostat, and all this stuff. We were using a system to do that, and it just was really interesting for me to sort of see um, the pulse of the house, meaning what was happening and what were the signals going on. I felt very yeah sure it's this idea of using data to monitor, but also I was really sensitive to the kind of the privacy implications of it. And we sort of had this discussion about like cameras and we knew we wouldn't have cameras inside the house. That was completely off limits. Should we have a camera observing the parking area to see if there were 12 spots? We ultimately decided that it was inappropriate and that we shouldn't do it. So, but I remember that kind of wrestling with like, well, what does it mean to have someone, who's really your guest, in some level, and what are the boundaries and lines there between that interaction? I ultimately opted, and I think this is maybe, telling. I ultimately opted to just have a really open line of communication. We set up a phone number and a text number that would be routed to me, only as text. So they couldn't just call willy nilly, but I would always receive a text knowing that there was something going on, and that gave me the ability to activate whatever local resources I needed to solve the problem.
Well, I can so relate to that midnight call. I'm sure everybody listening who's ever, your ringer just kind of isn't allowed to completely go off. You're not allowed to be MIA, nor should you. Um, let's relate that a little bit to ŌURA and what you study, because that is almost like a passive and persistent
Yeah.
layer to your life that for me, when I retired in 2019, I had my phone on. I was on duty for 7 years. Meanwhile, I thought it was a part-time job. And I think for you, like, what is how do you relate the on-duty nature and the hospitality nature, right? Responsive time, how quickly you can respond matters, to what that does to your body, or how people might, be a boiling frog with that and perhaps burn out over time because of that, accretive element and build up.
Well, as a host or a owner or a property manager, you have this kind of sense that you're competing not just to get the booking, but to deliver a great service, right? Because you want those great reviews, at the end of that stay, and you want them to be glowing and to talk about you in the highest terms. And maybe that's a personal ambition. You feel accountable to your guests, but also I think it's a a business decision because you need to be having a stellar reputation for stays in your house. And so you tend to be very, very focused on that what we would call the guest experience. So the way I thought about it, really was twofold. One is that it took a village. Even though I felt that sort of, kind of, I was the point of accountability where, the message would show up here and I would take action. But sometimes I would pass that responsibility between me and my wife. And so that there were times when, I could kind of not shoulder it. And then I think also knowing that I had local resources that I could draw on. That ranged from, of course, our wonderful housekeeper, our handyman, all the things that I think every owner and PM knows, that you need that kind of village of people to depend on. So, of course, that stress and that kind of, as you say, the sort of the midnight call or the midnight interruption, it's really important to recognize that like life is never going to stop coming at you with activity. So the other way I thought about it was, how do I build systems that were technical systems that could defray that? And in my industry, we talk a lot about how do we allow people to self-service. And so that became actually a really important thread. It's like, how do we create enough information, whether it's the black binder of information or some kind of mobile app with all that information? How do we create paths for the guests to kind of self-service and therefore defray that midnight call? Now, it doesn't mean those midnight calls aren't coming. They might continue to come, but if you can reduce the volume of that. Now, I think where you're going with this, Dave, and I think it's interesting, is how do you just deal with life? Because the midnight call, maybe it's going to come from your vacation rental, but maybe it's going to come from any number of things, that's going on that could cause stress for you. And the reality is, the stress, it doesn't go away. I hate to say it, like you can't, you're never going to get rid of stress. You're never going to get rid of that midnight call. All you can really do is figure out how to manage it better, and all you can really do is figure out how to become more resilient. What kind of decisions or habits can you form to make yourself more resilient to stress? What kind of choices can you make to make yourself more resilient to stress or to that midnight call? What are the ways that you can build systems that are going to allow you to feel that midnight call better? And I think that's kind of a big part of what ŌURA is about, which is like, look, we're going to give you tools and mechanisms to understand how to build resilience. And the reality is the way you build resilience is you stress yourself, and then your body kind of recovers to that stress and then gets to a new level. It's just like working out. It's the same idea. You stress your muscles, and in that recovery, your muscles get stronger. And then the next time the stress comes, you're more resilient. And I think that's both, like, that's a physiological process in ŌURA, but I also think it's a philosophical approach to life, which is you're never going to avoid stress. You just got to figure out how to manage it effectively.
Awesome. And I don't know if you meant to tee up the perfect segue, but I think one of the coolest stories that I know, just because I have a Google alert that's for Tom Hale. So when a new pod drops, a new Tom Hale pod, I put it in my queue. But I want you to help us take us on a little journey here of how you accepted the ring. This was
Yeah.
before you were the
How I
Lord of
put
the
a ring on it?
Rings. What's
Yeah.
that? Yeah,
How
yeah,
I put a ring on. Well,
yeah.
first of all, I mean, for those of you who don't know, the ŌURA ring is basically a medical grade device in a consumer friendly package. I'm wearing one. It's pretty unobtrusive. It doesn't have a screen. It doesn't bleep bloop blop at you all the time. It doesn't vibrate. It's very calm and designed to kind of like passively monitor you in the background. And it's coupled with a mobile app that has all this sort of information. And the things that are important about it is that it measures 24/7. But because you are really oriented around sleep, we're measuring at night. And what's powerful about measuring at night is that your body's more or less in the same state every night, more or less, like you're asleep, hopefully. You're in your bed, usually. Sometimes you're in someone else's bed or some hotel's bed or a vacation rental's bed. And your body generally goes through a similar cycle, which is the sort of sleep cycle, which is biologically, your body temperature drops, your brain waves, go into deep sleep in the first part of the night and into REM sleep in the second part of the night, and you go through cycles. You move through the night. And the thing is that measuring at night gives you a really clean signal about what's going on with your body. Contrast that to sort of most daytime measurements are actually confounded by all sorts of things that are happening. There's like I could have a stressful day. I could be running up and down the stairs. I could have had an argument with my boss or my partner, and all those things become noise in your measurement. So because we're measuring at night, you kind of have a really clean, like normal baseline. And then that means you can detect more subtle changes from that baseline and therefore make predictions. And the magical moment that many people will cite about ŌURA is they'll be like, ŌURA told me I wasn't, maybe something was off and I didn't really feel sick, but it said maybe I should watch out. And then 3 days later, you're on the couch, not feeling great because you've gotten sick. And that's because that tiny gradation of change is something that ŌURA can see quite clearly and say, oh, you are getting sick. And by the way, you should pay attention to that. So zooming back, that's ŌURA. And I came to it, as I said, as like a sort of an armchair athlete and someone who cared about health. I'd had, like everybody else in the early 20s, gone through a massive pandemic, crisis, which taught everybody the fragility of their health. And at the time, I was the president of SurveyMonkey. We had sold the company to Zendesk. This was the fall of, I guess it was 22, maybe. I think it was the fall of 22. And there were three things going on in my life. One was the company that we had sold was in the process of getting unsold. I saw it from the first day we announced it. I was like, oh my God, this thing is going to go off the rails. This is very stressful, very stressful. Second thing, my kids were going through a tough time post COVID. They entered COVID at the age of 13, and it's tough enough to be 13, but it was tough. And we were definitely dealing with some tough times as a family. And then, of course, the last thing is that COVID was stressful in and of itself. And for the first time in my life, Dave, you know this, I'm a championship sleeper. I can fall asleep in any standing mid conversation. I'm a championship world class sleeper, and I was not sleeping, losing my mind. And I started researching, and I'm a curious person by nature, and believe that there are all sorts of ways to solve problems. So I started researching it, came across the ŌURA ring, and ordered it and sort of said, well, I'll give it a try. And what happened was over this course of about 5 or 6 weeks, I made some very simple behavior modifications that actually improved my sleep dramatically. And the things that I changed were, I stopped drinking coffee, I stopped drinking alcohol because I would go through this cycle of coffee in the morning and alcohol at night. I went to bed at the same time and I went to bed early. I stopped looking at devices. I cut out kind of like the Netflix binging. I slept in a colder room and I worked out. I made a point of working out more and maybe more intensely than I had normally. And I did work out. I just sort of pushed it a little bit. And the net of that was that my sleep transformed. The quality of my sleep transformed. The quantity got a little bit different, a little bit better because I was going to bed earlier, but like transformed. And it was like walking out of a black and white, low grade television, screen into 4K Technicolor. It was amazing. My cognition, my energy, my mood, all these things were transformed by this experience of improving sleep. And I realized that I had really not been sleeping well since my mid 30s when I had kids. The combination of life, kids, pressure, all that stuff just had pushed it. I was pushing my sleep and recovery to a point where my body had figured out how to adapt, but wasn't very effective at the result. And I was like, wow, I've been working with products for my entire career, and I'd very rarely come across a product that has such an impactful change in someone's life, my life, in a short amount of time. And I was like, I need to be involved in this company. So I reached out to them, and coincidentally, they were doing a CEO search at the time. They were very clear that I was not the right candidate profile. I was a software person. They wanted a consumer product goods person. I'd never done anything in hardware outside of NoiseAware. Actually, Dave, that was the one hardware experience I had. And they said, "Hey, we're not interested." And I said, "You guys are making a mistake." And I did something, that is uncharacteristically, for me anyway. I pushed hard and I wrote them a letter that said, "I think you guys are making a terrible mistake. I'm the right person for this job, and here's why." And that sort of got me into the search in earnest. And at the end of it, they selected me, and that's what got me to ŌURA. And the thing is that there are very few things in life where you can really have a profound impact. Um, and I think about products that you make. Most products don't necessarily have a profound impact, and this was one that had a profound impact, and I couldn't help but jump at it.
Yeah, and again, with following you and knowing you and checking in with you a couple of times every year, I see this, it's we hear of product market fit, but there's like now product Tom fit, and I think product timing fit with what the world needs, perhaps.
Yeah.
I have, personally tried to deprecate or just reduce the number of alerts that I get all the time, all directions. And I see what you're doing at ŌURA as this wearables for health, not alerts movement.
Yeah.
And almost, like you said, by design, it's calm. And I'm curious in your perspective, and this is going to loop back to this kind of boiling frog element that we as hosts, owners, and managers have. Um, why is it important to have this data and then also be able to receive it kind of when you want it, as opposed to it being pushed on you? And do you feel like that's something that you're on the frontier of? Is that important to ŌURA to kind of have this ethos of we're not going to bother you, but we'll be there for you?
Well, I think it's obvious to say that when you can measure something, you'll do a better job at understanding it or managing it. I think Peter Drucker famously said, "What's measured is managed." And so having data is sort of like a foundational capability. However, to make that data meaningful, you need some kind of interpretation and some kind of context. And I think anybody who runs a vacation rental, knows this. There's all sorts of data that you can pay attention to. What matters, is what are the types of people who book and why do they book and what is it about your property that's attractive or unique or differentiated to get them to book. So this idea of kind of meaning, extracting meaning, is sort of a next level. And then there's like, okay, well, what kind of advice do you offer for a wearable? Generally, most wearables are just giving you data. And you have to kind of apply the meaning and maybe figure out what advice. Well, we provide all of those. We try and interpret that data for you. We also try and provide, kind of insights and maybe a little bit of guidance about what you could get to. And then the last thing, of course, and this is what really matters, is the action that you take. If you're a vacation rental owner, you might change change the way you position your property to be more competitive. You might adjust your price up or down. Those actions are the things that matter, because that's what's going to result in the outcome that you're trying to get. And that's really what the key is. It's not about those, having data. It's not about just having meaning. It's not just about having kind of insights or advice. It's about doing something. And that's the key that I think, to your point, nagging you with notifications. Think about like sort of your typical fitness trackers, like, get your 10,000 steps in, Dave. Get off the couch, you lazy bum. I mean, it's a little bit like, it's good. It's pushing you. It's accountability. I don't mean to run that down at all. It's really important. But what you're really looking for is long-term sustainable change. And long-term sustainable change in a lifestyle, turns out there's a lot of studies about how humans form habits. They form habits when they do something consistently for at least 6 weeks. Right? You're not going to form a habit by doing something once or twice. You got to do it consistently. You have to have a feedback loop, which is, why is this habit something I should continue investing my time and energy in? And that's where the data comes in. It gives you that feedback loop. And then the last thing is, you need to understand the why, whether it's a physiological, kind of understanding of how heart rate variability correlates to stress in your body, or, hey, if I lower my price, I'm going to get more bookings. It's that understanding that drives the behavior, and understanding your market is the same thing as understanding your body. So this idea that, like, looking across all of this data, you need two things to be true. One, the data needs to be good. It needs to be accurate. It needs to be, meaningful and consistent. And I think this is one of the places where wearables have made a lot of progress. If you measure at the wrist, most of these sensors are working by shining various signals into your body, and then kind of looking at what comes back and making assessments about what's going on. Heart rate being a classic example. But if you look at the wrist, you've got like hair and bone and sinew, and it's capillary action, and you've got the blood returning to the heart. If you look at the finger, you've got an artery. Goes, your heart pumps, blood goes right down your arm, goes right underneath your finger, and that location is incredibly accurate, because the signal is about 50 to 100 times stronger than it is here. When you go to the hospital, where do they put the sensor for SpO2, which is blood oxygenation, and pulse? Where do they put it? Put it as a clamp on your finger. It's the same thing. This is uniform tissue. The blood flow is about 2 or 4 millimeters below the surface of the skin. You're getting a very strong signal. And that kind of quality of data, really critical in every case. Do you trust and do you believe the data? So that's a really interesting kind of like side note of, like, if you're going to get data, you might as well get good data. What do you trust? What do you believe in? And that's where I think ŌURA really shines, is getting that high quality, high power, very, very accurate continuous signal. And that informs data going into a system that analyzes it and then spits it back to you. And here's the other thing, David. People talk about vacation rentals as if it's a monolithic block. Everyone knows this. Every market is different. Sonoma is not the same as Destin. Destin is not the same as Cape Cod. Cape Cod is not the same as New York. You have to understand kind of the particulars. In ŌURA speak, we would say this is about who you are, because medicine for years has been practiced on the averages, and those averages have been, looking across large populations and saying, well, the probabilities suggest that if you do this, you'll live longer, you'll be healthier, and if we do this intervention, the probabilities suggest that it works because we've done the average across this. Guess what? That's a fallacy. And increasingly in healthcare, people are realizing that you need to personalize treatment, you need to personalize interventions, you need to personalize behavior modification, because we are not the same. We have different genes, we have different health histories, we have different life circumstances, we have different habits, we eat different foods, we have different kind of results from all of that. And when you look across that, how do you personalize? You need data. And so that's really the kind of maybe the fundamental philosophical difference. And I think it's applicable in vacation rental land, which is that you should know your customer base and who rents your property. For me, it was multi-generational families, weekenders from the city, and groups that were trying to celebrate a life. And so I knew that, and so that's what I targeted. And that informed my business. Same idea with your health. It's all about what you know about what you're doing and what's appropriate for your life circumstance.
I love that. And I clearly know your next career is going to be as a professor, explaining how our bodies work in terms we can understand, because that's a superpower you have.
I'll be going for my board certifications as a medical doctor approximately never.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I missed that boat, but it is fascinating. And look, I think this is actually true about many things. The quality and accessibility of information, it's light night and day. Even 20 years ago, in our lifetime, the access to understanding about medical sciences, Dr. Google feeding a scientific study to Chat GPT and saying, "Explain it to me." Like, we're in a different world.
Yeah, and I think that's to the point is I'm actually reverse engineering my thinking here and saying like if I had never even heard of a wearable, if I had never even thought about pulse ox or HRV or words that acronyms that I slightly know what I'm talking about, but words you I'm sure deeply know. Um, where do people start, right? What are let's take it out of the wearable realm too. Like somebody's getting stressed, maybe they have an owner if they're a manager who's kind of, causing stress or a guest situation or maybe their life, like you said, it could be family stuff and it's impacting. What are some of the non-wearable signals in one's life that they should say, hey, I'm issue spotting, and then maybe because Tom said something or it related to something that, they could better understand with data, it's just hard to spot those things. What are some of the typical reasons that people end up saying, you know what, I need to make a change. I need to make a change in my habits, like you mentioned, but I want to do it in a way where I have this feedback loop and so forth. But in the real world, in the real life, what are those signals? I mean, sleep, it sounds like is one, but what else do you typically hear from clients and customers?
Well, I mean, I'll start with sleep, and I think there's been a revolution maybe in sleep science in the past 5 to 10 years, where people now really understand how important sleep is as a foundation of health. And I don't just mean physical health; I mean mental health as well. And so, making sure that you are doing everything that you can to get sleep and to make sure it's high quality sleep is one of the most foundational ways that you can build resilience. The science that we've kind of maybe validated and uncovered in the past 10 years have highlighted a couple of very simple truisms. The first one is that you get most of your deep sleep in the first part of the night. And so, depending on what kind of what we call chronotype you are, meaning are you an early bird, are you a short sleeper, are you someone who stays up late but sleeps in late? Those things are actually somewhat genetically determined. They're determined also by your life stage, because everyone knows this, teenagers have a different sleep schedule than 55-year-olds, right? And need actual different amounts of sleep. But that first part of sleep is where your body repairs itself. That's what deep sleep is. The second part of sleep is REM sleep, and that's actually where your brain is doing a lot of the kind of processing. Think of it as you've got all this input that happened during the day. That input is happening to you. So how do you actually process that? Well, your brain's sort of saying, this is important, I'm going to store it long term. This is not important, I'm going to throw it away. This is something I want to kind of wire into the system and maybe come back to later. And that processing is what REM sleep is all about, which is why scientists think your dreams are basically about you processing that, and you've reached some level of consciousness that you're aware of that processing as it's happening. So those two elements are really foundational, and making sure you get good sleep, because if you go to bed at the wrong time and you don't get deep sleep, your body doesn't recover. And if you drink alcohol and you go into a night's sleep, your REM sleep is disrupted. So that processing, is lost to your body. So this understanding of sleep has been, I think, foundational in people understanding how it affects their health. Now, sleep is also implicated in a lot of other parts of your health. I'm not going to go too deep, but I'll give you just a little insight into it. So sleep is implicated in immunity. The more you sleep, the better your body is at responding to infection or attack. Great, very obvious. Sleep is implicated actually in nutrition. The two hormones that regulate whether you feel satisfied or whether you feel hungry, which are called leptin and ghrelin, are actually amplified by getting high quality, long duration sleep. And if you, by conversely, have short, low quality sleep, those hormones are pushed out. Your body's basically saying, hey, if you're not going to sleep, you're not going to repair your body, you better eat. And this is, evolutionarily speaking, like that's how people survive, because if they were being chased by lions on the African desert, like they absolutely needed to eat because even they weren't sleeping, they needed to survive. So that's the feedback loop around kind of appetite and satiety, which is feeling satisfied and you don't need to eat more. So if you don't sleep, this is why midnight snacking, you guys, is a thing, right? That's literally your body saying to you, you should get some food. It's like an evolutionary thing. All right. So that's appetite. And then the last one is really, if you think about kind of cognitive health, sleep is actually heavily implicated over the long term, and low quality, low duration sleep over the long term is heavily correlated with Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's. So mental, kind of degenerative diseases are related to how effective your sleep is. So having an emphasis and focus on sleep is really foundational for understanding what you're doing today affects your entire life. Okay, so that's sleep, and I think that's a really foundational. The other part of course, is that sleep is a very good habit to get into because it's a daily reward. You know, Dave, I know you work out, you feel that reward, you maintain, but like it's hard to have that inertia because it takes 4 to 6 weeks to see real impact to your health from going to the gym or working out. You get one good night's sleep, and you're like, give me some more of that. And that feedback loop is really powerful for forming habits. So, zooming back, I think that's one of the strongest ways that you can build up resilience. And I'll go back to my original point. Stress is not going to go away. What can change about stress is how you respond to it, how you prepare for it, how you manage it, and then ultimately, how do you look at the root cause of that stress and then try and either improve it or ameliorate it or understand it in a way. If you've got a bad, if you've got a bad host or owner who's really causing you problems, then maybe that person shouldn't be part of your roster. I'm not saying that, in any specific case, but the thing is, like, if you find something that's really problematic in your life, it is on you to change it, not someone else.
And I guess there's also a reason people, when you're, there's a lot of thoughts swirling and maybe you're emotional, but like, you know what, let's sleep on that one. Let's actually let our bodies digest whatever's going on, maybe reset the clock and look at it with fresh eyes. Um, on on that note, and on the note of somebody who's thinking about their health and the moment that they're in, people are busy, right? People have, we in Rent Responsibly often talk about asking for people's 25th hour in the day to go, build community or meet the other host community members that might be down the street. And I think that there's this, like you said, instant reward system when you do connect with somebody who's maybe going through the same thing, but it does feel like work or something out of your norm to get there. So we're community builders at heart at Rent Responsibly. And I'm curious, you built a large community of people who have said, they've put a ring on it and they're figuring out how it's helping them. How do you guys think about your ŌURA community, and how do you mine your ŌURA community for insights? Because I think, they're the closest ones to the problem. It's their finger that it's on. Because that's one thing we think a lot about is like the answers are really at the furthest extremity. And for you, that might be literally the finger of your customer. But how are you getting this feedback loop? And then also, how are you guys thinking about community with respect to your customer base and your
Well,
folks?
I think it's important to know that wellness, for people, there's sort of like lots of different schools of thought about this, but almost every one of them says wellness is the combination of one, what you eat, two, how well you sleep, three, do you get enough exercise, four, how do you manage your mental health and stress, five, the connection you have in your life. And there's all sorts of studies that have looked at this and that demonstrate that happiness later in life is all about community. Loneliness and a lack of connection are all the reasons why mental health issues are as pronounced as they are. This is really, I think, fundamentally a philosophy. It's not just a philosophy that's made up. It's actually been the philosophy of call it wise men in our human history for the past 10,000 years, which is that being connected is part of life. And actually, I think it's one of the reasons why vacation rentals, as a being essentially an exchange of value where one side of the value is a place to, spend your night, but also to have like connection. And, whether that connection is between, I mean, I used to really appreciate it when someone was like, I'm celebrating my 65th birthday with my entire family, and we'd book for them, and I'd be like, that's amazing. I'm playing a small role in that, but I feel connected to you in this moment. And the reviews that I would read that demonstrated that I was helped, great, love that connection. So connections is a huge part of, I think, wellness as an overall strategy. I think for ŌURA, what we experience is that the people who wear an ŌURA ring are incredibly evangelical about it. They buy them for their partners, they buy them for their kids, they buy them for their aging parents, they recommend them to friends. Half of our sales come through referral and recommendation by people who use it. And I think that the inside, or the so what of that, is one, you should build a product and deliver a service and build an experience if you're trying to make something that helps and fosters people's love of it and helps and fosters connection. I think that's just a philosophical underpinning, and maybe conversely works against isolating people. One of the things we experience and sometimes worry about is that people become too obsessed with their data, and our kind of advice to them is, hey, listen, take it easy. Like, if you're obsessing over this, it's probably not working to your advantage. So, like, take the thing off. Like, and I know that's kind of contrary for most products, where it's like we're trying to get more engagement and more time, and we're very, very sensitive to that. So it's an important kind of distinction. The other part of it, and I think this actually, Dave, I think you and I have talked about this a lot, because it's one of the things I've as a product builder and innovator my entire life, is that you have got to be super close to your customers, and you've got to talk to them, and you've got to listen to them, and that just needs to be a foundational element. I remember you and I were having a conversation about like how you structure your week, and I said, well, one of the things I do is I reserve Thursday morning for customer conversations, and I sort of make sure that every week I'm having at least 4 or 5 customer conversations, so I can really understand viscerally what's going on. And I think that's true. I think we do that as vacation rental owners naturally. We look at the reviews, we talk to our customers, we have interactions that help us understand the connection that we're delivering. Conversely, you have to foster community, and the way you foster community is you show up. You show up. You have events like this where you bring people together. You figure out the topics that are important. You try and discuss them. You're trying to sort of help people understand the importance of maybe wellness and as a strategy, not just for vacation rentals, but for your life. And that's why I'm here, to help support that. So having an intention to connect and to build community, I think is really strong. And the reason why is because, sure, this is a really wonderful device. And yes, the software on this device is really good, and our algorithms are high quality, and the insights that we build that are personalized to you are amazing. But the reality is that, like, what we see? We see people changing their behavior based on what we offer. I'll give you a simple example. I know somebody whose wife was going through chemotherapy, and they would share their information daily. We actually have a mechanism for this in the product, and they would share their information, and they could see kind of how things were going for each other. And in particular, this person could see that a day was a bad day, and that maybe based on that bad day, their readiness score was low or their heart rate was elevated, that maybe they should change their behavior. They should come home from work early. They should pick up dinner. They should offer to pick up the kid from school. Whatever it was, that kind of awareness of what's going on in someone else's physiology, which could be like, hey, honey, I'm really not feeling well. It was just part of the information environment that he lived in. And that kind of notion that, like, there are new ways of connecting that are based on knowledge that you might not otherwise have, I think is just so profound. And it's a form of connection, because on those days when, he looked at her readiness score and saw it was low and came home early, she was profoundly grateful, and that reinforced their connection. So I know that's kind of a little bit philosophical, but I do think that building community is something you have to do intentionally, but sometimes you also need the opportunity to do it. For him, it was seeing how the biometric scores for the day were not as good as they needed to be, and therefore changing the intervention. I'll zoom all the way back out. I think that's how healthcare needs to evolve. Today, healthcare is about, we're going to intervene when you're sick. We're gonna manage it once it's chronic. You've already got Alzheimer's. How do we deal with that? And the reality is that what we've got to do is shift focus to prevention and fostering the behaviors that are going to result in better outcomes. And the reason why we do that is because we want those better outcomes. You want your mother or father not to succumb to Alzheimer's. You want to make sure that my father died of a heart attack. So you want to make sure that he eats well, and not after the heart attack, but before, because that's how you drive those outcomes. That shift in healthcare is going to be informed by data. It's going to be informed by knowledge. It's going to be informed by these devices feeding data to these devices, which are the most powerful computing devices in our world. And this becomes the GP, the general practitioner, lives in your pocket, and it's looking over you 24/7. That's a really interesting and profound change that I think is already underway. It's starting to happen. The way I would think about this in the long term is that we're moving from sick care, really, to something that's more wellness. It's really about wellness, and I think that trend is off to the races. And I think that's a little bit what is happening in our society. I think COVID was a huge part of that. So that idea of how healthcare evolves really is based on understanding, data, self-awareness, and individuals making behavioral changes. Because if you look at the things that are going to kill you, all right, here's 100% of the things that are going to kill you. Roughly 20% are disease states that are related to genetics. Sorry, can't help you. Like there's very little to be done, because until we can really alter people's genetic makeup, that's that. Okay. Next, sort of 15 to 20% of things that are going to kill you are environmental. You're exposed to asbestos as a young person, and you're breathing that in, you're probably going to get a lung cancer. Smoking, behaviors that are environmental. The balance of it, roughly 60% of the all-cause mortality, are behavior-based. Heart attacks, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. And the thing is, you can make behavioral changes now that are going to reduce the probability of those. And that's good for you as an individual. It's also good for the society, because as a society, the United States produces, a trillion, 16, 17 trillion dollars of GDP. We spend 25% of that on healthcare. And most of those people, we spend that money at the end of their life. That's a terrible burden that we bear. Not just an individual personal burden of the loss and death of a parent or something like that, but more importantly, it's a terrible burden for the society to bear. You could spend that money on things like education. You could spend that money on building, building housing. You could do all sorts of things if there was a surplus there. And right now, it's a huge drain. Sorry for getting on my soapbox, David, but I took your hint.
No, you could spend it on vacations with your family, and instead of vacation rental, create those memories. When they speak a lot about those longitudinal, I think there are Harvard studies where it's like, well, what do you care about at the end? And it's often vacations and time spent with your whole family. I mean, I've had that. You mentioned your father. I lost my mother, and you remember that as well. And it really forces you to think about what are the best times of your life. And in the vacation rental industry, you mentioned it. It's an honor. It's an honor to take somebody's, if they have 2 weeks of vacation a year, and maybe they're going to do a family vacation at one of them. That basically means they're spending 51 weeks of the year for that 1 week that they can come stay and create that memory, that at the end of the day, that's what they care about. And I love what you're speaking about, because it's so personal, right? Everything is so personal. And then you have this ability to go macro and super macro, and with all the data that you're looking at. The thing I want to key in on a little bit here is, ŌURA has gone, it's a consumer device, but now there's also this enterprise element where it's kind of a workplace slash just large set of folks. I'd point to the Department of Defense. I know nothing about what that's actually going to turn into, but I have to imagine that they think in big population terms as well. And for me personally, we started Rent Responsibly almost the day COVID hit, well, a couple of weeks before. And I'm sitting here at home. You're sitting there at home. It's Saturday, because everybody's going to know this is recorded at this point. But it really dawns on me that this work life world that prior, not just to COVID, but that we live in now, it's very blurry. It's very, very blurry. Like, when do you turn one on and turn one off? And then especially in the vacation rental world with that 24-hour hospitality layer, on-call layer, there's a whole nother element of work life, almost not even blurring. It's like it's all one. And so for you, how do you see rest and relaxation and ways that people can actually intentionally, okay, go work out, got it. Like we've all heard that since day one. But what are some of the ways that people can intentionally create space to get away from stressors? And also, where does that show up in your world in ŌURA and perhaps in your own life? What do you do to do that? I'm sure you have a couple other things to do today and every day because you have a big job, but how do you get away from it?
Well, it's a great question and maybe a difficult one to consider generally because I think the specifics really matter here. But I'll throw out some generalizations, and I think this is also informed by my own experience. So going back to that time, fall of 22, which was not this a definite low point. A couple of things that I started experimenting with, actually, interestingly, kind of stimulated by ŌURA as well, that really made a difference. Um, and I think maybe this is more accepted now, but I think even at the time, I think I was pretty skeptical about it. Which is it's the power of actually breathing. And there's a metric in ŌURA, it's called heart rate variability. And basically, you have two sides to your nervous system. You have your parasympathetic and your sympathetic. One is responsible for resting and digesting, and that's sort of sending signals to all of the parts of your body, your organs, your brain, your heart, your digestive system, and kind of sending these messages of like, hey, it's time to chill out and recover and rest. And you have this other side, which is like, there's something that's going to get you, you got to run away. And stress, in some sense, is that side of your nervous system responding to whatever you perceive as a threat. It's your limbic system saying, something's coming to get you, and that stress over time can be very, it's what actually runs you down. So the interesting thing about heart rate variability is it measures the kind of call it weighting or which part of your nervous system is actually driving at any given time. When you're asleep, obviously your parasympathetic's in charge. When you are like being chased by a tiger or having a fight with your wife or whatever it is, your sympathetic nervous system is in charge. So it turns out when you breathe and you control your breathing and you focus on your breathing, this physiological thing happens. And what it's basically a set of nerves that go down. It's called the vagus nerve, goes all the way down, and it starts to send signals that said, "Hey, we should let the parasympathetic system be in charge." And that is calming, and that sends signals all throughout your body that things are going to be okay, and it counteracts the sort of flight or flight response which you might be feeling. Which is why, and strangely enough, like people say, when you get upset, what you should do: take a breath, take a pause, and really, because there's a physiology and maybe thousands of years of civilization have reinforced it. Doing that actually changes your physiology, and you can see it showing up in your heart rate variability. Heart rate variability. I don't want to get into it too much, but basically, if your heart is beating like this, like a jackhammer, you have very little variability between heartbeat. The space, the time between each heartbeat is more uniform. If you're relaxed, your heart is like maybe one beat will come, and then you'll have 1,100 milliseconds to the next one, and then you'll have 950 milliseconds to the next one. That means your parasympathetic nervous system is in charge. That tension embodied in HRV is something that the ŌURA ring tracks exceedingly well and tells you how to do it. Okay, so why am I telling you all this? Like, what's the point of understanding stress? Well, the point is in that period where I was very stressed, one of the things that I learned was that if I took a short break, like a 5 to 10 minute break, and I did some breathing exercises, my stress levels would drop. And I mean, like dramatically. In fact, we could collectively here, we could all probably do like a 2 minute breathing exercise, and all of our heart rate variability, if they were measured, you would see them slightly increase. And in the product, we have a mechanism for this. It's called an unguided session. It basically creates a recording of your body for a short period of time. And if you do a meditation session or a breathing exercise or a cold plunge or whatever, you'll see certain things happen. When you relax, your blood vessels dilate at your extremities, blood flows, and your temperature rises a little bit. So you should see a temperature rise. When you do a breathing session, your heart rate should lower from jackhammer, it should lower over time. when you are relaxed and your parasympathetic nervous system is in charge and your sympathetic nervous system is like, okay, I can chill out, you see your heart rate variability go up. And so it's a really interesting reinforcement. And for my experience, I was doing these things and saying, oh my God, I always thought meditation was like some California foofy thing. My wife would say, no, 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 there's like 3,000 years of human civilization and religious practice that would suggest that like actually it has a real purpose. And I'd be like, no, no, no. And then I saw my own data and I was transformed. I realized that this was a tool I could use. So maybe I'll offer that up to anybody who's watching this, that even something as simple as breath, can have a really profound impact on your nervous system. Other things, the obvious things: take short breaks, get up. Just moving around resets your brain. If you're having an emotional conflict, step away from it. Find something else to focus on. All these things are somewhat obvious, and maybe we've heard them all, but the reality is your physiology will reflect it. And maybe more importantly, if you see your physiology reflected back to you as data, then you understand that it's not just how you feel, it's what your body's actually doing. You ever heard this book, The Body Keeps the Score?
Heard of it.
You guys should read it. It's an amazing book. It really talks about how emotional and psychological and physiological stress gets stored in the body, and that if you can reduce it, you're taking steps away from burnout. It's amazing. It's amazing. Highly
Yeah.
recommend.
Yeah, I've been studying, I guess it's called polyvagal theory, which is the different states that you can go through. You're describing them in HRV terms, but then it also layers in the way it impacts your mind. You feel paralyzed, or you feel agitated, or you feel peaceful and harmonious with the world around you. It's just the language too that people use around this, either inaccessible or it's like, oh, that makes sense. Like you're just breaking down barriers to trying things. I think you're doing a great job helping us understand, how this actually all works. And then, feedback loop is if you can have your own personal data almost in real time or over a day, a week, a month. I think that's novel. And for me, Tom, I think, like I said in the beginning, we've known each other 8 years, and I think we both had different periods of highs and lows, because we all choose roller coastery career journeys in that regard. But I think your insight and almost having somebody to call in times of stress, which not everybody does, but I think both you and I have intentionally created, I would call myself the mentee, you the mentor, and perhaps friends in both directions at this point, but especially in the beginning, I was under a lot of stress at different points, and you got some, maybe not 1 a.m. calls, but you got some calls. And first of all, I want to thank you for that.
My
But
pleasure.
yeah, but also I want to, bring this back into vacation rental land, and maybe, early stage startup founders, forget whether it's a tech or any venture side hustle company. It's stressful. It's just purely stressful. You're doing a lot of things you've never done before, but that doesn't mean they haven't been done before. And by definition, everything you're trying to do has generally been done before, save for maybe the innovative piece of your company. So I'm curious to you to pose to you, why I'm not the only person you've ever advised or mentored, but why do you carve out time for that? And maybe you had mentors along the way that meant a lot to you. Just maybe we'll kind of bring this to ground, and then I got some lightning round questions, which will be easy, and then we can launch into the rest of the program. But why is mentoring? Why is helping people who are under stress, especially in the business environment, important to you? And how's that been a part of your life?
It's simple. Many people helped me along my way, and I remember a moment when someone said, to me, "Who's your personal board of directors?" And I was like, I had never really thought of it that way. And so I began to kind of think about cultivating a group of people who could give me advice or counsel or support. And it was transformative. It happened relatively early in my career, and it became something that I felt like I have to pay that forward. You are an example of that. I do remember some of those calls, and I do remember how stressful it is to start something from the get go. And humans are unpredictable, and so having another person there to can say, look, this will pass, or well, this is what I might do, or geez, I'm really sorry this is happening to you. It's incredibly powerful, and I think it's important. I think for people to understand that um, you know, there really is such a thing as wisdom. I used to discount it. I used to think I knew everything. And, there I was in my 20s and I was like, I got this. I didn't know what I was doing more often than not. And every now and then, I think about all the wisdom that's been passed to me. I feel an obligation, maybe as part of being a human being on the planet to try and pass some of that scar tissue and experience to others. And whatever. That sounds very like high-minded and stuff like that. And I'll tell you, I don't feel like I know everything now. I feel actually I know a whole lot less, and I know a whole lot more about what I don't know now than I did when I was 20. But it's an important thing to do, and I think I take it incredibly seriously, and I try and do it intentionally, and I try to make myself accessible to people. I get LinkedIn contacts all the time from people saying, hey, I'm like a student or I'm in my 20s, and I just feel like I have some obligation to respond. I can't always give them like as much time as you and I have spent together, Dave, but I just feel like it's a really important obligation to be a good human.
Yeah, and I'll state this to the public now is I've started trying to do the same for especially people pretty much exclusively who want to get into vacation rentals because this accumulated knowledge and contacts and context for how things are going is something I find very enjoyable because, you did it for me, other people did it for me. But so if anybody out there is curious, just, send me a LinkedIn. I would love to be helpful in any way I can. And that's part of what we do at Rent Responsibly, truly, is connect people because, it might not be me that can help you, but I might know the right person. So with that, I want to go to a lightning round. Look at the nervousness. I wonder what your data is doing right now. Um, readiness score just just dropped
Let's
10
see.
points. Can we real time? No, that's just kidding.
My daytime stress, which is there, is actually relatively low. I was peaked at the morning because I did a workout, and then
Oh,
it's sorry, but it's dropped back down. So I'm in a relaxed state right now, David. I don't think the
okay.
lightning round is gonna stress me too much.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to also do a polygraph because how stress and polygraph. Yeah, that'll be the next test. Anyways, what is the single most important metric to track one's health?
Well, I think it really depends on what your health goal is. If it's really um, well, let me give you a couple of examples just to make it concrete. Uh, if you're a woman, temperature is really important because over the course of your cycle, your temperature varies in a very predictable way. So any deviation from that predictable pattern is either a sign of your things are going well or things are not going well. And so that temperature would be one. I think for stress, I think heart rate variability, as we've discussed, the sort of tension between these two sides of your nervous system is a really important one. It's also really important for recovery. It's a good measure of not just like I'm feeling stressed, but also physical stress. So athletes, many athletes who are preparing for big races or a big event, they'll make sure that their heart rate variability is in some bounds because if they're overtraining, their heart rate variability will be low, and then they'll be like, I'm not when I get to the big day, I'm not going to perform as well. So that's one I would recommend for people who are interested in performance. If you're trying to manage a chronic disease state, diabetes or long COVID or ME/CFS, activity is really an important one to look at because in many of those kind of energy related or energy constrained kind of chronic states, if you overdo it, you're setting yourself off for 4 or 5 days of not feeling well because you've overdone what your body's capacity is, and you need to learn what that is. Not just how you feel, but how you measure it. If you're aging and you're interested in longevity, and I say this as a 55-year-old, I guess now 56, I just had a birthday. 56-year-old, thank you, is that you're really looking at the things that could cause mortality, and maybe even cognitive decline. For me, I'm worried about heart issues, so I monitor a metric in ŌURA, which is called cardiovascular age. And what it measures is something called pulse wave velocity, which is about the speed at which uh, blood is moving through your body. And that's a measure actually of arterial stiffness. Think about a pipe. If you have a PVC pipe and you push a lot of water through it, it doesn't expand at all. And if you increase the pressure, it's just going to go faster. And the stress and physics of that are going to be, you're going to have more pressure in your system. Young, healthy arteries, by contrast, they actually expand. So when the pressure wave comes through, they actually expand and absorb some of that energy. Pulse wave velocity is a correlative or a predictor of arterial stiffness. Arterial stiffness is the result of occlusion. Occlusion is the thing that generally causes a heart attack. Not all. There's lots of other kinds of ways you can have a heart attack, but that is one of the most profound. You think about it, an arterial sclerosis. So as a change in your pulse wave velocity is a prediction that you might be headed down a path that you probably don't want to head. So I pay close attention to that. So those are some of the ways you think about it. But the thing is it's specific to you and what your life circumstance is. If you're training for a marathon, that's really different from someone who's managing long COVID. Those are not the same things.
So I think I actually asked a question that teed up an impossible answer, but you did answer my next one, which is what is your favorite feature? What do you pay the most attention to? It sounds like this heart wave.
Cardiovascular age, CVA. That's the one I say.
Okay, cardiovascular age, count it. Um, Tom, I mentioned you had a big October. What was the highlight for you in October?
Um, well, there were many, so it's hard to pick one.
You got to pick one, man. You got to
Okay,
pick
well,
one.
I'll say this. I'll say we did an acquisition of a company called Very. I'm a believer in acquisitions to bring talent, to bring technology, to bring access to new markets or business models. That's a way I've grown businesses. And actually, to HomeAway, HomeAway's history is one of acquisition and building up, kind of critical mass of both supply, listings, and also technology and people. So, very acquisition. I'm wearing a continuous glucose monitor, so I know at any given time during the day what my blood glucose is. And many people understand this if they have diabetes. You're looking for these spikes or declines in your blood sugar, and then you administer insulin. I don't have diabetes, but I'm very interested in my blood sugar levels, basically because blood sugar spikes or surpluses in your body are correlated with a lot of long-term health issues. Type 2 diabetes would be one, but there's lots of other things that come along with it, other comorbidities. So I'm wearing one of these to sort of monitor it. Very is a company that really understands those signals and correlates them with other biometrics and gives you advice about what you should do, what foods you should eat. So I'm now taking a photo of every meal, and the ŌURA app tells me what's the composition of that meal. And soon with Very, we'll be able to see how that correlates with your blood sugar trends and what behaviors improve blood sugar. It's a good thing to take a walk after dinner because basically what you're doing is you're burning through the spare glycogen that is being generated by what you ate, and you're consuming that in your muscles. And then if you do that, less of it gets stored in your body. Do you know how your body stores sugar? Dave, you want to
Fat,
take a guess? How does your
fat,
body store glycogen over time when it's not using it?
fat.
Fat. And so, fat's good because it's a great energy store, but you're limited. You're building up what's called insulin resistance, which is the hormone that your body releases when you have either too much or too little sugar in your body. So that's something we're really focused on. That was something I had an ambition for when I first came to the company. It took about 18 months, 24 months for us to get it done, and that was the thing that I found most exciting about it.
Awesome. And I can see, you start with the ring, but I don't think that's where you guys end, or, it's not limited at all. I'm excited to watch where it goes. So I have a final question. Um, when you think of where Aura Ring is now and the far future, you talked about healthcare and then wellness, or sick care and wellness. What is your one wish for I hate to say humanity, but like in the context of wellness, what is your one wish that Aura Ring and Aura Health, I guess is the bigger company name, can bring to the world? What is your one, what's the mission there? What is your
You know,
vision?
to me, it all comes back to education and understanding, because you can't make behavioral change if you don't understand the why of it, and that requires education, not just about science or health and all the topics we discussed today, but also about like why it matters to you and why it's personal to you. So that would be my big wish, and I think this goes hand in hand with something that's really important. Maybe you know, kind of draw it out here, but is that little steps is how everything gets done. Big changes are hard, and coordinating a giant transformation is difficult, and building a company is difficult, building a vacation rental business is difficult, but you have to take little steps, and those little steps add up, to the big journey. So I think as I think about Aura, or I think about myself and my own life, or you and your life, or Rent Responsibly, you just got to get up, show up, do something every day that's going to move the ball forward, and do it with intention. And the thing is that if you keep making the right decisions over a long period of time, those decisions compound to your benefit, whether it's your health, or the growth of your business, or the richness of your life, or the sense that you're having a positive impact on the world, one little step at a time. And you and I have talked about this, Dave, because that was one of the things that you felt very strongly. You were over, like there were so many things happening. What did you focus on? I said, listen, you can't focus on everything. Just pick something. Just make some forward progress. Choose a 100-day goal and make some progress on that 100-day goal, and that reinforces it. Users would see like, okay, I'll keep taking steps.
Small hinges open big doors.
Wow,
One of my favorite quotes.
pithy.
Tom
That's good.
Hale, you have gone from the Oracle of Austin to the Lord of the Rings to now the Professor of the Rings. I've learned so much today. I hope everybody else did too. I really do thank you for your time, and I can't wait to see you sometime soon. Give you a big hug. So thank you again for kicking off this Rent Responsibly Summit, Rise and
Thanks, Dave.
Thrive. We got a great set of sessions for everybody to indulge themselves in, to be calm and to be present in, and to Tom's point, education. We're going to help you learn, and here we build community. So stick around. We got a lot to go. It's gonna be a great day. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it, and glad to be here. Hope you guys all have an amazing session here.